He didn't exactly freak, but he wiggled back out faster than he'd wiggled in. And his knee locked up again just as he got entirely clear. He rolled over on his back, whimpering, looking up into the snow, the last of it, now coming down in great big flakes as lacy as woman's best underwear, and massaging the knee, telling it to, "Come on now, honey. Come on, sweetie. Let go, you fucking bitch." And just as he was staring to think that this time it wouldn't, it did. He hissed through his teeth, sat up, and looked at the bag with "Thanks for shopping at our place" printed on the side in red. "Where else would I shop, you old bastard?" he asked. He decided to allow himself one beer, after all, before starting back to the woman. Hell, it would lighten the load. Pete fished one out, twisted the cap, and poured the top half down his throat in 4 big gulps. It was cold, and the snow was sitting in was even colder. But he still felt better. That was the magic of beer. The magic of Scotch, vodka and gin as well, but when it came to alcohol, he was with Tom T. Hall. He liked beer. Looking at the bag, he thought again of the carrot top back in the stove, the mystified grin, the Chinese eyes that had originally earned such people the terms Mongoloids, as in Mongoloid idiot. That led him to Duddits again. Douglas Cavell, if you wanted to be formal about it. Why Duds has been on his mind so much lately, Pete couldn't say. But he had, and Pete made himself a promise. When this was over, he was going to stop in Derry and see old Duddits. He'd make the others go with him, and somehow he didn't think he'd have to try very hard to convince them. Duddits was probably the reason they were still friends after so many years. Hell, most kids never so much as thought of their college or high school buddies again, let alone those they chummed with in junior high. What was now known as middle school, although Pete had no doubt it was the same sad jungle of insecurities, confusion, smelly armpits, crazy fads, and half-baked ideas. They hadn't known Duddits from school, of course, because Duddits didn't go to Derry Junior High. Duds went to the Mary M. Snow School of the Exceptional, which was known to the neighborhood kids as the Retard Academy or sometimes just the Dumb School. In the ordinary course of events, their paths would have never crossed, but there was this vacant lot out in Kansas Street and the abandoned brick building that went with it. Facing the street, you could still read Tracker Brothers Shipping, Trucking and Storage in fading white paint on the old red brick. And on the other side, in the big alcove, where the trucks have once backed up to unload, something else was painted there. Now sitting in the snow, but no longer feeling it, melting to cold slush under his ass, drinking his second beer without even being aware he had opened it. The first empty he had cast into the woods, where he could still see animals moving east. Pete remembered the day he had met Duds. He remembered Beaver's stupid jacket that the Beav had loved so much, and Beaver's voice, thin but somehow powerful, announcing the end of something and the beginning of something else, announcing in some ungraspable but perfectly real and knowable way that the course of their lives had changed one Tuesday afternoon, when all they had been planning was some 2-on-2 in Jonesy's driveway and then maybe a game of Parcheesi in front of the TV. Now sitting here in the woods beside the overturned Scout, still smelling the cologne Henry hadn't been wearing, drinking his life's happy poison with a hand wearing a blood-stained glove. The car salesman remembered the boy who had not quite given up his dreams of being an astronaut, in spite of his increasing problems with math. Jonesy had helped him, and then Henry had helped him, and then in 10th grade he'd been beyond help. And he remembered the other boys as well, mostly the Beav, who had turned the world upside down with a high yell in his just beginning to change voice. "Hey you guys, quit it! Just fucking quit it!" "Beaver," Pete said, and toasted the dark afternoon as he sat with his back propped against the overturned Scout's hood. "You were beautiful, man, but hadn't they all been? Hadn't they all been beautiful?" Because he is in the 8th grade, and his class of the day is music, On the ground floor, Pete is always before his three best friends who always finish the day on the second floor. Jonesy and Henry in American fiction, which is in the reading class for smart kids, and Beaver next door in math for living, which is actually math for stupid boys and girls. Pete is fighting hard not to have to take that one next year, but he thinks it's the fight he will ultimately lose. He can add, subtract, multiply and divide. He can do fractions too, although it takes him too much time. But now there is something new. Now there is the X. Pete does not understand the X and fears it. He stands outside the gate by the chain link fence as the rest of the 8th graders and the baby-ass 7th graders stream by. Stands there kicking his boots and pretending to smoke, one hand cupped to his mouth and the other concealed beneath it. The concealed hand, the one with the hypothetical hidden butt. And now, here comes the 9th graders from the second floor, and walking among them like royalty, like uncrowned kings. Almost, although Pete would never say such a corny thing out loud, are his friends Jonesy and Beaver and Henry. And if there is a king of kings, it is Henry, whom all the girls love, even he does wear glasses. Pete is lucky to have such friends, and he knows it. Is probably the luckiest 8th grader in Derry, X or no X. The fact that having friends in the 9th grade keeps him from getting beaten up by any of the 9th grade badasses is the very least of it. "Hey, Pete," Henry says, as the three of them come sauntering out through the gate. As always, Henry seemed surprised to see him there, but absolutely delighted. "What you up to, my man?" "Nothing much," Pete replies as always. "What's up with you?" "SSDD," Henry says, whipping out his glasses and giving them a polish. If there had been a club, SSDD likely would have been their motto. Eventually, they will even teach duddits to say it. It came out, say, "Shish ifa day" in Duddit's ease. And it is one of the few things Duddit says that his parents can't understand. This, of course, will delight Pete and his friends. Now, however, with Duddits still half an hour in their future, Pete just echoes Henry. "Yeah, man, SSDD. Same shit, different day. Except in their hearts, the boys only believe the first half. Because in their hearts, they believe it's the same day, day after day. It's Derry, it's 1978, and it will always be 1978. They say there will be a future, and they will live to see the 21st century. Henry will be a lawyer, Jonesy will be a writer, Beaver will be a long-haul truck driver, Pete will be an astronaut with a NASA patch on his shoulder. But this is just what they say as they chant the Apostles' Creed in church with no real idea of what's coming out of their mouths. What they are really interested in is Maureen Chessman's skirt, which was short to begin with and has ridden a pretty good way up her thighs as she shifted around. They believe in their hearts that one day Maureen's skirt will ride up high enough for them to see the color of her panties, and they similarly believe that Derry is forever, and so are they. It will always be junior high school and 3:15. They will always be walking up Kansas Street together to play basketball in Jonesy's driveway. Pete also has a hoop in his driveway, but they like Jonesy's better because his father has posted it low enough so that you can dunk. Talking about the same old things, classes and teachers, and which kid got into a fucking pisser with which kid, or which kid is going to get into a fucking pisser with which kid. Whether or not so-and-so could take so-and-so if they got into a fucking pisser. Except they never will because so-and-so are tight. Who did something gross lately? Their favorite so far this year has to do with the 7th grader named Norm Pamelo, now known as Marconi Pamelo, a nickname that will pursue him for years, even in the new century of which these boys speak, but do not in their hearts actually believe, to win a 50-cent bet. Norm Pamelo had one day in the cafeteria firmly plugged both nostrils with macaroni and cheese, then hawked it back like a snot and swallowed it. Macaroni Pamelo, who, like so many junior high school kids, has mistaken notoriety for celebrity. Who is going out with whom? If a girl and guy are observed going home together after school, they are presumed to be probably going out. If they are observed hanging onto hands or sucking face, it is a certainty. Who is going to win the Super Bowl? Fucking Patriots. Fucking Boston Patriots. Only they never do. Having to root for the Patriots is a fucking pisser. All these topics are the same and yet endlessly fascinating as they walk from the same school. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, on the same street, maker of heaven and earth, under the same white, everlasting October sky, world without end, with the same friends. Amen. Same shit, same day, that is the truth in their hearts, and they are down with the Casey and the Sunshine Band on this one. Even though they will all tell you RIRDS. Rock is rolling, disco sucks. That's the way they like it. Change will come upon them sudden and unannounced. As it always does with children of this age, if change needed permission from junior high school students, it would cease to exist. Today they also have hunting to talk about, because next month, Mr. Clarendon is for the first time going to take them up to the hole in the wall. They'll be gone for 3 days, 2 of them school days. There is no problem getting permission of this trip from the school, and absolutely no need to lie about the trip's purpose. Southern Maine may have gotten certified, but up here in God's country, hunting is still considered part of the young person's education, especially if the young person is a boy. The idea of creeping through the woods with loaded rifles while their friends are back at dear old DJHS, just droning away, strikes them as incredibly, delightfully boss, as they walk past the Retard Academy on the other side of the street without even seeing it. The retards get out at the same time as the kids at Derry Junior High, and most of them go home with their mothers on the special retard bus, which is blue instead of yellow and is reputed to have a bumper sticker on it that says, "Support mental health or I'll kill you." As Henry, Beaver, Jonesy and Pete walk past Mary M. Snow on the other side, a few high-functioning retards who are allowed to go home by themselves are still walking along, goggling around themselves with those weird expressions of perpetual wonder. Pete and his friends see them without seeing them, as always. They are just part of the world's wallpaper. Henry, Jonesy and Pete are listening closely to the Beav, who's telling them that when they get to the hole in the wall, they have to get down in the gulch, because that's where the big ones always go. There's bushes down there, and they like, "Me and my dad have seen about 1 billion deer in there," he says. The zippers on his old motorcycle jacket jingle agreeably. They argue about who's going to get the biggest deer and where is the best place to shoot one, so that you can bring it down with one shot and it won't suffer. Except my father says that animals don't suffer the way people do when they get hurt. He says God made them different that way, so it would be okay for us to hunt them. They laugh and squabble and argue over who is the most likely to blow lunch when it comes time to gut their kills. The Retard Academy falls farther and farther behind. Ahead of them, on their side of the street, looms the square red brick building where Tracker Brothers used to do their business. "If anyone hurls, it won't be me," Beaver boasts. "I seen deer guts 1,000 times, and they don't bother me at all. I remember once—" "Hey you guys," Jonesy breaks in, suddenly excited. "You want to see Tina Jean Schlossinger's pussy?" "Who's Tina Jean Schloppinger?" Pete asks, but he's already intrigued. Seeing any pussy seems like a great idea to him. He's always looking at his dad's Penthouse and Playboy magazines, which his dad keeps out in his workshop, behind the big Craftsman toolbox. Pussy is very interesting. It doesn't give him a boner and make him feel sexy the way bare tits do, but he guesses that's all because he's still a kid. And pussy is interesting. "Schlossinger," Jonesy says, laughing. "Schlossinger, Peterski. The Schlossingers live 2 blocks over from me, and—" He stops suddenly, struck by an important question which must be answered immediately. He turns to Henry. "Are the Schlossingers Jews or Republicans?" Now it's Henry's laughing at Jonesy, but without any malice. Technically, it's possible to be both at the same time or neither one. Henry pronounces the word neither instead of neither, which impresses Pete. It sounds smart as a motherfucker, and he reminds himself to say it that way from now on. Neither, 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 he tells himself, but knows somehow that he will forget, and that he is one of those people condemned to say neither all his life. Never mind religion and politics, Henry says, still laughing. If you got a picture of Tina Jean Schlesinger showing her pussy, I want to see it. The beef, meanwhile, has become visibly excited, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, and he goes to stick a fresh toothpick in his mouth before the old one is even half finished. The zippers on his jacket, the one Beaver's older brother wore during his 4 or 5 years of Fonzie worship, jingle faster. Is she blonde? The Beaver asked. Blonde and in high school? Super good looking? Got... He holds his hand out in front of his chest, and when Jonesy nods, grinning, Beaver turns to Pete and blurts. This year's homecoming queen, up at the high school ring meet. Her picture is in the fucking paper. Up on that float, with Richie Granado. Yes, but the fucking Tigers lost the homecoming game and Granado ended up with a broken nose, Henry says. First Derry High team ever to play a Class A team from southern Maine, and those fools... Fuck the Tigers. Pete breaks in. He has more interest in the high school football than he does in the dreaded X. But not much. Anyway, he's got the girl placed now, remembers the newspaper photo of her standing on the flower-decked bed of a pulp truck next to the Tiger quarterback. Both of them wearing tinfoil crowns, smiling and waving to the crowd. The girl's hair fell around her face in big blowy Farrah Fawcett waves, and her gown was strapless, showing the tops of her breasts. For the first time in his life, Pete feels real lust. It is a meaty feeling, red and heavy, that stiffens his prick, dries up the spit in his mouth, and makes it hard for him to hard for him to think. Pussy is interesting. The idea of local pussy, homecoming queen pussy, that is a lot more than exciting. That is, as the Derry News film critic sometimes says about movies she especially likes, a must-see. Where? He asked Jonesy breathlessly. He's imagining seeing this girl, this Tina Jean Schlesinger, waiting on the corner for the school bus, just standing there giggling with her girlfriends, not having the slightest idea that the boy walking past has seen what is under her skirt or her jeans, and that he knows if the hair on her pussy is the same color as the hair on her head. Pete is on fire. Where is it? There, Jonesy says, and points at the red brick box that is Tracker Brothers' old freight and storage depot. There is ivy crawling up the sides, but this has been a cold fall, and most of the leaves have already died and turned black. Some of the windows are broken and the rest are blurry. Looking at the place gives Pete a little chill. Partly because the big kids, the high school kids, and even some that are beyond high school, play baseball in the vacant lot behind the building. And big kids like to beat up little kids. Who knows why? It relieved the monotony or something. But it isn't the big deal, because baseball is over the year and the big kids have probably moved on to Strawford Park, where they will play two-hand touch football until the snow flies. Once the snow flies, they will beat each other's brains in playing hockey with old friction-taped sticks. No, the big deal is that kids sometimes disappear in Derry. Derry is funny that way, and when they do disappear, they are often last seen in out-of-the-way places like the deserted Tracker Brothers depot. No one talks about this unpleasant fact, but everyone knows about it. Yet, a pussy, not some fictional penthouse pussy, but the actual muff of an actual girl from town, that would be something to see, all right. That would be a fucking pisser. Tracker Brothers, Henry says with frank disbelief. They have stopped now, are standing together in a little clump not far away from the building while the last of the retards go moaning and goggling on the other side of the street. I think the world of you, Jonesy. Don't get me wrong, the fucking world. But why would there be a picture of Tina Jean's pussy in there? I don't know, Jonesy said, but Davy Trask saw it and said it was her. I don't know what's going in there, man, Beaver said. I mean, I'd love to see Tina Jean Slopehanger's pussy, Schlosinger. But that place has been empty at least since we were in the 5th grade. Beav. And I bet it's full of rats. Beav. But Beav intends to have his entire say. Rats get rabies. They get rabies up the old wazoo. We don't have to go in, Jonesy says. And all three look at him with renewed interest. This is, as the fellow said, when he saw the black-haired Swede, a Norse of a different color. Jonesy sees he has their full attention, nods, goes on. Davy says all you have got to do is go around the driveway side and look in the 3rd or 4th window. It used to be Phil and Tony Tracker's office. There's still a bulletin board on the wall. And Davy said the only 2 things on the bulletin board are a map of the New England showing all the truck routes and a picture of Tina Jean Schlosinger showing all of her pussy. They look at him with breathless interest, and Pete asks the question which has occurred to all of them. Is she bollocky? No, Jonesy admits. Davy says you can't even see her tits, but she's holding her skirt up and she isn't wearing pants, and you can see it just as clear as day. Pete is disappointed that this year's Tiger Homecoming Queen isn't bollocky bare ass, but the thing about how she's holding her skirt up inflames them all, feeding some primal semi-secret notion of how sex really works. A girl could hold her skirt up, after all, any girl could. Not even Henry asks any more questions. The only question comes from the Beav, who asks if Jonesy is sure they won't have to go inside in order to see. And they are already moving in the direction of the driveway running down the far side of the building toward the vacant lot, powerful as a spring tide in their nearly mindless notion. Pete finished the second beer and heaved the bottle deep into the woods, feeling better now. He got cautiously to his feet and dusted the snow from his ass. And his knee, a little bit looser, he thought maybe it was, looked awful of course. Looked like he had a little model of the Minnesota goddamn Metrodome under there. But he felt a bit better. Still he walked carefully, swinging his plastic sack of beer in short arcs beside him. Now that the small but powerful voice insisted that he had to have beer, just as goddamn had been silenced. He thought of a woman with a new solicitude. Hoping she hadn't noticed he was gone. He would walk slowly, he would stop to massage his knee every 5 minutes or so, and maybe talk to it, encourage it. A crazy idea, but he was out there on his own, and it couldn't hurt. And he would get back to the woman. Then he would have another beer. He did not look back at the overturned Scout, did not see he had written "Duddits" in the snow over and over again as he sat thinking of that day back in 1978. Only Henry had asked why the Schlossinger's girl's picture would be there in the empty office of her empty freight depot. And Pete thought now that Henry had only asked because he had to fulfill his role as a group skeptic. Certainly, he'd only asked once. As for the rest of them, they had simply believed. And why not? At 13, Pete had still spent half of his life believing in Santa Claus. And besides, Pete stopped near the top of the big hill, not because he was out of breath, or because his leg was cramping up, but because he could suddenly feel a low humming sound in his head. Sort of like an electrical transformer, only with the kind of cycling quality to it, a low thud, thud, thud. And no, it wasn't suddenly, as it suddenly started up. He had an idea the sound had been there for a while, and he was just becoming aware of it. And he had started to think some funny stuff. All that about Henry's cologne, for instance, and Marcy, someone named Marcy. He didn't think he knew anyone named Marcy, but the name was suddenly in his head. As in Marcy, I need you, or Marcy, I want you, or zounds, Marcy, bring the gasoline. He stood where he was, licking his dry lips, the bag of beer hanging straight down from his hand now, its pendulum motion stilled. He looked up in the sky, suddenly sure the lights would be there. And they were there. Only just two of them now. And very faint. "Tell Marcy to make them give me a shot," Pete said, enunciating each word carefully in the stillness, and knew they were exactly the right words. Right, why or right how he couldn't say, but yes, those were the words in his head. Was it the click, or had the lights caused those thoughts? Pete couldn't say for sure. Maybe neither, he said. Pete realized the last of the snow had stopped. The world around him was only three colors: the deep gray of the sky, the deep green of his furs, and the perfect, unblemished white of the new snow. And hushed. Pete cocked his head first on one side and then to the other, listening. Yes, hushed. Nothing. No sound in the world, and the humming noise had stopped as completely as the snow. And when he looked up, he saw that pale moth-like glow of the lights was also gone. "Marcy," he said, as if calling someone. It occurred to him that Marcy might be the name of the woman who had caused them to wreck, but he dismissed the idea. The woman's name was Becky. He knew it as surely as he had known the name of the real estate woman that time. Marcy was just a word now, and nothing about it called to him. Probably he'd just had a brain cramp. Wouldn't be the first time. He finished climbing the hill and started down the other side, his thoughts returning to that day in the fall of 1978, the day they had met Duddits. He was almost back to the place where the road leveled when his knee abruptly let go, not locking up this time, but seeming to explode like a pine knot in a hot fire. Pete pitched forward into the snow. He didn't hear the Bud bottles break inside the bag. All but two of them. He was screaming too loudly. Duddits, Part 2. Henry started off in the direction of the camp at a quick walk. But as the snow subsided to isolated flurries and the wind began to die, he upped the walk to a steady, clock-like jog. He had been jogging for years, and the pace felt natural enough. He might have to pull up for a while, walk or even rest, but he doubted it. He had run road races longer than 9 miles, although not for a couple of years, and never with 4 inches of snow underfoot. Still, what was there to worry about? Falling down and busting a hip? Maybe having a heart attack. At 37, a heart attack seemed unlikely. But even if he had been a prime candidate for one, worrying about it would have been ludicrous, wouldn't it? Considering what he was planning. So, what was there to worry about? Jonesy and Beaver, that was that. On the face of it, that seemed as ludicrous as worrying about suffering a catastrophic cardiac outage here in the middle of nowhere. The trouble was behind him, with Pete and that strange, semi-comatose woman not up ahead at Hole in the Wall. Except that was trouble at Hole in the Wall. Bad trouble. He didn't know how he knew that, but he did, and he accepted the knowing. Even before he started encountering the animals, all hurrying by and none giving him, more than that, the most cursory glance, he knew that. Once or twice he glanced up into the sky looking for more fool lights. But there were none to be seen, and after that he just kept looking straight ahead, sometimes having to zigzag out of the way of the animals. They weren't quite stampeding, but their eyes had an odd spooky look that Henry had never seen before. Once he had to skip handily to keep from being upended by a pair of hurrying foxes. 8 more miles, he told himself. It became a jogging mantra. Different from the ones that usually went through his head when he was running. Nursery rhymes were the most common, but not that different. Same idea, really. 8 more miles, 8 more miles to Banbury Cross. No Banbury Cross, though. Just Mr. Clarendon's old camp, Beaver's camp. And no cockhorse to get him there. What was cockhorse, anyway? Who knew? And what in Christ's name was happening out here? The lights, the slow-motion stampede. Dear God! What was that in the woods off to his left? Was that a fucking bear? The woman in the road just sitting there with most of her teeth and most of her brains missing. And those farts, dear God, the only thing he'd ever smelled, even remotely like it was the breath of a patient he had once, a schizophrenic with intestinal cancer. Always that smell, an internist friend had told Henry when Henry tried to describe it. They can brush their teeth 12 times a day, use laborious every hour on the hour, and that smell still comes through. It's the smell of the body eating itself. Because that's all cancer is when you take the diagnostic masks off. Autocannibalism. 7 more miles, and all the animals are running. All the animals are headed for Disneyland. And when they get there, they form a conga line and sing, "It's a small world after all." The steady, muted thud of his booted feet. The feel of his glasses bouncing up and down on the bridge of his nose. His breath coming out in balloons of cold vapor. But he felt warm now, felt good, those endorphins kicking in. Whatever was wrong with him, it was no shortage of those. He was suicidal, but by no means dysthymic. That at least some of his problem, the physical and emotional emptiness, that was like a near whiteout in a blizzard, was physical. Hormonal, he had no doubt. That the problem could be addressed, if not entirely corrected by pills he himself had prescribed by the bushel. He had no doubt of that either. But like Pete, who undoubtedly knew there was a rehab, a years of AA meetings in his most plausible future, Henry did not want to be fixed, was somehow convinced that the fix would be a lie, something that would lessen him. He wondered if Pete had gone back to the beer, and knew the answer was probably yes. Henry would have suggested bringing it along if he had thought of it, making such a risky return trip, risky for the woman as well as Pete himself, unnecessary. But he'd been pretty freaked out, and the beer hadn't even crossed his mind. He bet it had crossed Pete's, though. Could Pete make it round trip on that sprung knee? It was possible, but Henry would not bet on it. "They're back!" the woman had screamed, looking up at the sky. "They're back! They're back!" Henry put his head down and jogged a little faster. 6 more miles, 6 more to Banbury Cross. Was it down to 6 yet? Or was he being too optimistic? Giving those old endorphins a little too much free rein? Well, so what if he was? Optimism couldn't hurt at this point. The snow had almost stopped falling, and the tide of the animals had slackened. And that was also good. What wasn't so good was the thoughts in his head, some of which seemed less and less like his own. Becky, for instance. Who was Becky? The name had begun to resonate in his head, had become another part of his mantra. He supposed it was the woman he had been avoided killing. "Whose little girl are you, Becky?" "Why, I am Becky. I'm pretty Becky Shue." Except she hadn't been pretty. Not pretty at all. One heavy-set, smelly mama, and what she'd been. And now she was in Pete Moore's less and less reliable care. 6 more miles to Banbury Cross. Jogging steadily as was possible, giving the footing and hearing strange voices in his head. Except only one of them was really strange. And that one wasn't a voice at all, but a kind of a hum with a rhythmic beat. "Whose little girl? Whose little girl? Pretty Becky Shue." Caught in it. The rest were voices he knew, or voices his friends knew. One was the voice Jonesy had told him about, a voice he'd heard after his accident, and associated with all this pain. "Please stop. I can't stand it. Give me a shot. Where's Marcy?" He heard Beaver's voice. "Go look in the chamber pot." Jonesy answering. Why don't we give a knock on the bathroom door and ask him how he is? The stranger's voice saying that if he could just do a number 2, he'd be okay. Only he was no stranger. He was Rick, Pretty Becky's friend Rick. Rick what? McCarthy? McKinley? McKinn? Henry wasn't sure, but he leaned towards McCarthy, like Kevin McCarthy in that old horror movie about the pods from space that made themselves look like people. One of Jonesy's faves. Get a few drinks in him and mention that movie, and Jonesy would respond with a key line at once. They're here! They are here! The woman looking up at the sky and screaming, They're back! They're back! Dear Christ, there had been nothing like this since they were kids, and this was worse, like picking up a power line filled with voices instead of electricity. All those patients over the years complaining of voices in their heads, and Henry, the big psychiatrist, young Mr. God, one state hospital patient called him back in the early days, had nodded as if he knew what they were talking about, had in fact believed he did know what they were talking about, but maybe only now did he really know. Voices. Listening to them so hard, he missed the whoop 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 of the helicopter passing overhead. A dark rushing shark shape barely obscured by the bottoms of the clouds. Then the voices began to fade as radio signals from faraway places do when daylight comes, and the atmosphere once again begins to thicken. At last, there was only the voice of his own thoughts, insisting that something terrible had happened or was about to happen at the hole in the wall, that something equally terrible was about to happen or had happened back there at the scout or the logger shelter. 5 more miles, 5 more miles. In an effort to turn his mind away from his friend behind and his friends ahead, what might be happening all around him, he let his mind go where he knew Pete's mind had already gone, to 1978 and Tracker Brothers and to Duddits. How Duddits Cavell could have anything to do with this fuckero, Henry didn't understand. But they had all been thinking about him, and Henry didn't even need that old mental connection to know it. Pete had mentioned Duds while they were dragging the woman to the logger's shelter on that piece of tarp. Beaver had been talking about Duddits just the other day, when Henry and the Beav had been in the woods together. The day Henry had tagged his deer that had been. The Beav reminiscing about how the 4 of them had taken Duddits Christmas shopping in Bangor one day, just after Jonesy had gotten his license, that was. Jonesy would have driven anyone anywhere that winter. The Beav laughing about how Duddits had worried Santa Claus wasn't real, and all 4 of them, big high school galoots by then, thinking they had the world by the tail, working to reconvince Duddits that Santa was a true thing, the real deal. Which of course they're done, and Jonesy had called Henry from Brookline just last month, drunk. Drunkenness was much rarer for Jonesy, especially since his accident, than it was for Pete, and it was the only maudlin call Henry had ever gotten from the man, saying that he had never done anything in his life that was as good, as plain, and simple bald as fine. And what they had done for poor old Duddits Cavell back in 1978? That was our finest hour, Jonesy had said on the phone, and with a nasty jolt, Henry realized he had told Pete exactly the same thing. Duddits, man. Fucking duds. 5 more miles, or maybe 4. 5 more miles, or maybe 4. They had been going to see the picture of girl's pussy, the picture supposedly tacked up on the bulletin board of some deserted office. Henry couldn't remember the girl's name, not after all these years, only that she had been that prick Granadou's girlfriend and the 1978 homecoming queen at Derry High. Those things had made the prospect of seeing her pussy especially interesting. And then, just as they got to the driveway, they had seen a discarded red and white Derry Tigers shirt. And a little way down the driveway, there had been something else. I hate that fucking show. They never changed their clothes," Pete had said, and Henry opened his mouth to reply only after he could. "The kiddo screamed," Henry said. He slipped in the snow, tottered for a moment, then ran on again, remembering that October day under that white sky. He ran on remembering Duddits, how Duddits had screamed and changed all their lives. For the better, they had always assumed, but now Henry wondered. Right now, he wondered very much. When they get to the driveway, not much of a driveway, weeds are growing even in the gravelly wheel ruts now. Beaver is in the lead. Beaver is indeed almost foaming at the jaws. Henry guesses that Pete is nearly as brought up, but Pete is holding it in better. Even though he is a year younger, Beaver is, what's the word, agog. Henry almost laughs at the aptness of it, and then Beav stops so suddenly, Pete almost runs into him. "Hey," Beaver says, "fuck me, Freddy, some kid's shirt." It is indeed red and white, and not old and dirty, as if it had been there 1,000 years. In fact, it looks almost new. Shirt smart, who gives a shit? Jonesy wants to know. Let's just hold your horses, the Beav says. This is a good shirt. Except when he picks it up, they see that it isn't. New, yes, a brand new Derry Tiger shirt with 19 on the back. Pete doesn't give a shit for football, but the rest of them recognize it as Richie Granado's number. Good. No, not anymore. It's ripped deeply in the back collar, as if the person wearing it had tried to run away, then been grabbed and hauled back. Guess I was wrong, the Beav says, sadly, and drops it again. But before they get very far, they come across something else. This time it's yellow instead of red, that bright yellow plastic only a kid could love. Henry trots ahead of the others and picks it up. It's a lunchbox with Scooby-Doo and friends on it, all of them running from what appears to be a haunted house. Like the shirt, it looks new, not anything that's been lying out here at any length of time. And all at once, Henry is starting to have a bad feeling about this. Starting to wish they hadn't detoured into this deserted driveway by this deserted building at all, or at least had saved it for another day. Which even at 14 he realizes is stupid. When it comes to pussy, he thinks, you either go or you don't. There's no such thing as saving it for another day. I hate that fucking show, Pete says, looking over Henry's shoulder at the lunchbox. They never change their clothes. Did you ever notice that? Wear the same fucking thing show in and show out. Jonesy takes the Scooby-Doo lunchbox from Henry and turns it to look at something he's seen pasted on the end. The wild look had gone out of Jonesy's eyes. He's frowning slightly. Henry has an idea Jonesy is also wishing they'd just gone on and played some 2-on-2. The sticker on the side reads, I belong to Douglas Cabell, 19 Maple Lane, Derry, Maine. If the boy I belong to is lost, call 949-1864. Thanks. Henry opens his mouth to say the lunchbox and the shirt must belong to a kid who goes to the Retard Academy. He's sure of it, just looking at the sticker, which is almost like the tag that fucking dog wears. But before he can, there is a scream from the far side of the building, over where the big kids play baseball in the summer. It's full of hurt, that scream. But what starts Henry running before he can think about it is the surprise in it. The awful surprise of someone who had been hurt or scared, or both, for the first time. The others follow him. They run up to the weedy right rut of the driveway, the one closest to the building, in single file. Henry, Jonesy, the Beav, and Pete. There is hearty male laughter. Go on, eat it. Someone says, eat it and you can go. Duncan might even give you your pants back. Yeah, if you... Another boy, probably Duncan, begins and then stops, staring at Henry and his friends. Hey, you guys, quit it! Beaver shouts. Just fucking quit it! Duncan's friends, there are 2 of them, both wearing Derry High School jackets, realizing they are no longer unobserved at their afternoon's entertainment and turn. kneeling on the gravel amid them, dressed only in underpants and one sneaker, his face smeared with blood and dirt and snot and tears, is a kid of an age Henry cannot determine. He's not a little kid, not with that powdering of hair on his chest, but he has the look of a little kid just the same. His eyes have a Chinese tilt and are bright green, swimming with tears. On the red brick wall behind this little group, printed in large white letters which are fading but still legible, is the message, "No bounce, no play." Which probably means keep the games and the balls away from the building and out in the vacant lot, where the deep ruts of the base parts and the rugged hill of the pitcher's mound can still be seen. But who can say for sure? No bounce, no play. In the years to come they will say this often. It will become one of the private catchphrases of their youth and has no exact meaning. Who knows, perhaps comes closest, or what you can do. It is always best spoken with a shrug, a smile, and hands tipped up to the sky. "Who the fuck are you?" one of the big boys asked the beeve. On his left hand he's wearing what looks like a batting glove, or maybe a golf glove, something athletic anyway. In it is the dried dog turd he's been trying to make the mostly naked boy eat. "What are you doing?" "What are you doing?" Jonesy asks, horrified. "You're trying to make him eat that? The fuck's wrong with you?" The kid holding the dog turd has a wide swatch of white tape across the bridge of his nose, and Henry utters a bark of recognition that is half surprise and half laughter. It's too perfect, isn't it? They are here to look at the pussy of the homecoming queen, and here by God is the homecoming king, whose football season has apparently been ended by nothing worse than a broken nose, who is currently passing his time doing stuff like this while the rest of the team practices for this week's game. Richie Granado hasn't noticed Henry's look of recognition. He's staring at Jonesy. Because he has been startled, and because Jonesy's tone of disgust is so completely unfeigned, Richie at first takes a step backward. Then he realizes that the kid who has dared to speak to him in such reproving tones is at least 3 years younger and 100 pounds lighter than he is. The sagging hand straightens again. "I'm gonna make him eat this piece of shit," he says. "Then he can go. You go now, snotball, unless you want half." "Yeah, fuck off," the third boy says. Richie Granado is big, but this boy is even bigger. A 6'5" hulk whose face flames with acne. "While you got the—" "I know who you are," Henry says. Richie's eyes switch to Henry. He looks suddenly wary, but he also looks pissed off. "Fuck off, Sonny, I mean it." "You're Richie Granado. Your picture was on the paper. What do you think people will say if we tell them what we caught you doing?" "You're not gonna tell anyone anything because you will be fucking dead," the one named Duncan says. He has a dirty blonde hair falling around his face and down his shoulders. "Get out of here, beat feet." Henry pays no attention to him. He stares at Richie Granado. He is aware of no fear, although there is no doubt that these 3 boys could stomp them flat. He is burning with an outrage he has never felt before, never even suspected. The kid kneeling on the ground is undoubtedly retarded, but not so retarded he doesn't understand these 3 big boys intended to hurt him, tore off his shirt, and then... Henry has never in his life been closer to getting good and beaten up, or been less concerned with it. He takes a step forward, fists clenching. The kid on the ground sobs, head now lowered, and the sound is now a constant tone in Henry's head, feeding his fury. "I'll tell," he says, and although it is a little kid's threat, he doesn't look like a little kid to himself. Nor to Richie, apparently. Richie takes a step backward, and the gloved hand with the dried turd in it sags again. For the first time, he looks alarmed. 3 against 1. A retarded kid. Fuck yeah, man. I'll tell. And I know who you are. Duncan and the big boy, the one not wearing a high school jacket, step up on either side of Richie. The boy in the underpants is behind them now, but Henry can still hear the pulsating drone of his sobs. It's in his head, beating in his head and driving him fucking crazy. "All right, okay, that's it," the biggest boy says. He grins, showing several holes where teeth once lived. "You're gonna die now." "Pete, you run where they come," Henry says, never taking his eyes from Richie Granado. "Run home and tell your mother." And to Richie, "You'll never catch him either. He runs like a fucking wind." Pete's voice sounds thin but not scared. "You got it, Henry. And the worse you beat us up, the worse it's gonna be for you," Jonesy says. Henry has already seen this, but for Jonesy, it is a revelation. He's almost laughing. "Even if you really did kill us, what good would it do to you? Because Pete does run fast, and he'll tell." "I run fast too," Richie says coldly. "I'll catch him." Henry turns first to Jonesy and then to Beav, both of them standing firm. Beaver in fact is doing a little more than that. He bends swiftly, picks up a couple of stones, they are the size of eggs, only with jagged edges, and begins to chunk them together. Beav's narrowed eyes shift back and forth between Richie Granado and the biggest boy, the galoot. The toothpick in his mouth jitters aggressively up and down. "When they come, go for Granado," Henry says. The other two can't even get close to Pete. He switches his gaze to Pete, who is pale but unafraid. His eyes are shining and he is almost dancing on the balls of his feet, eager to be off. "Tell your ma. Tell her where you are, to send the cops, and don't forget this bully motherfucker's name, whatever you do." He shoots a district attorney's accusing finger at Granado, who once more looks uncertain. No, more than uncertain, he looks afraid. "Richie Granado," Pete says, and now he does begin to dance. "I won't forget." "Come on, you dickweed," Beaver says. One thing about Beav, he knows a really excellent rank when he hears it. "I'm gonna break your nose again. What kind of a chicken shit quits off the football team because of a broken nose? Anyhow," Granado doesn't reply. No longer knows which of them to reply to, or maybe, and something rather wonderful is happening. The other boy in the high school jacket, Duncan, has also started to look uncertain. A flush is spreading on his cheeks and across his forehead. He wets his lips and looks uncertainly at Richie. Only the galoot still looks ready to fight, and Henry almost hopes they will fight. Henry and Jonesy and the Beav will give them a hell of a scrap if they do. Hell of a scrap. Because of that crying. That fucking awful crying. The way it gets in your head. The beat of that awful crying. "Hey, Rich, maybe we ought to..." Duncan begins. "Kill him!" the galoot rumbles. "Fuck him the fuck up!" This one takes a step forward, and for a moment it almost goes down. Henry knows that if the galoot had been allowed to take even one more step, he would have been out of Richie Granado's control. Like a mean old pit bull that breaks its leash and goes on flying in its prey. A meat arrow. But Richie doesn't let him get that next step, the one which will turn into a clumsy charge. He grabs the galoot's forearm, which is thicker than Henry's bicep and bristling with reddish gold hair. "No, Scotty," he says. "Wait a minute." "Yeah, wait," Duncan says, sounding almost panicky. He shoots Henry a look which Henry finds, even at the age of 14, grotesque. It's a reproachful look, as if Henry and his friends were the ones doing something wrong. "What do you want?" Richie asks Henry. "You want us to get out of here, that it?" Henry nods. "If we go, what you're gonna do? Who you're gonna tell?" Henry discovers an amazing thing. He's as close to coming unglued as Scotty, the galoot. Part of him wants to actually provoke a fight, to scream, "Everybody, fucking everybody!" knowing that his friends would back him up, would never say a word even if they got thrashed and sent to the hospital. But the kid, that poor little crying retarded kid. Once the big boys finish with Henry, Beaver and Jonesy, with Pete as well if they could catch him, they would finish with the retarded kid too, and it would likely go a lot further than making him eat a piece of dried dog turd. "No one," he says. "We won't tell anyone." "Fucking liar," Scotty says. "He's a fucking liar, Richie, look at him." Scotty stands forward again, but Richie tightens his grip on the big galoot's forearm. "If no one gets hurt," Jonesy said in a blessedly reasonable tone of voice, "no one's got a story to tell." Granado glances at him and then back at Henry. "Swear to God?" "Swear to God." Henry agrees. All of you, swear to God, Granadu asks. Jonesy, Beav and Pete all dutifully swear to God. Granadu thinks about it for a moment that seems very long and then nods. Okay, fuck this, we are going. If they come, run around the building the other way, Henry says to Pete, speaking very rapidly because the big boys are already in motion. But Granadu still has his hand clamped firmly on Scotty's forearm, and Henry thinks this is a good sign. I wouldn't waste my time, Henry Granadu says in a lofty tone of voice that makes Henry feel like laughing. But with an effort, he manages to keep a straight face. Laughing at this point would be a bad idea. Things are almost fixed up. There's a part of him that hates that, but the rest of him nearly trembles with relief. What's up with you anyway? Richie Granadu asks him. What's the big deal? Henry wants to ask his own questions, wants to ask Richie Granadu how he could do it. And it's no rhetorical question either. That crying, my God, but he keeps silent. Knowing anything he says might just provoke that asshole, get him moving all over again. There is a kind of dance going on here. It's almost like the ones you learn in 1st and 2nd grade, as Richie, Duncan and Scott walk toward the driveway, sauntering, attempting to show they are going off their own free will and haven't been frightened off by a bunch of homo junior high kids. Henry and his friends first move to face them and then step backward in a line toward the weeping kid, kneeling there in his underpants, blocking him from them. At the corner of the building, Richie pauses and gives them a final look. Gonna see you fellas again, he says. One by one or all together. Yeah, Duncan agrees. You're gonna be looking at the world through an oxygen tent. Scott adds, and Henry comes perilously close to laughing again. He prays that none of his friends will say anything, let done be done, and none of them do. It's almost a miracle. One final menacing look from Richie and they are gone around the corner. Henry, Jonesy, Beaver and Pete are left alone with the kid, who's rocking back and forth on his dirty knees, his dirty, bloody, tear-streaked, uncomprehending face cocked to the white sky like the face of a broken clock. All of them wondering what to do next. Talk to him? Tell him it's okay that the bad boys are gone and the danger has passed? He will never understand. And oh, that crying is so freaky. How could those kids, mean and stupid as they were, go on in the face of that crying? Henry will understand later, sort of, but at that moment, it's a complete mystery to him. I'm gonna try something, Beaver says abruptly. Yeah, sure, anything, Jonesy says. His voice is shaky. The Beav starts forward and then looks at his friends. It's an odd look, part shame, part defiance, and yes, Henry would swear it, part hope. If you tell anybody I did this, he says, I will never chum with you guys again. Never mind that crap, Pete says, and he also sounds shaky. If you can shut him up, do it. Beaver stands for a moment where Richie was standing while he tried to get the kid, eat the dog turd, then drops to his knees. Henry sees the kid's underwear shorts are in fact underoos, and that they feature the Scooby-Doo characters, plus Shaggy's mystery machine, just like the kid's lunchbox. Then Beaver takes the wailing, nearly naked boy into his arms and begins to sing. 4 more miles to Banbury Cross, or maybe only 3. 4 miles to Banbury Cross, or maybe only. Henry's feet skidded again, and this time he had no chance to get his balance back. He had been deep in the deep days of memory, and before he could come out of it, he was flying through the air. He landed heavily on his back, hitting hard enough to lose his wind in the loud and painful gasp. Ugh! Snow rose in the dreamy sugar puff, and he hit the back of his head hard enough to see stars. He lay there, heedless for a moment, giving anything broken ample opportunity to announce itself. When nothing did, he reached around and prodded the small of his back. Pain, but no agony. When they were 10 and 11 and spent what seemed like whole winters sledding in Strawford Park, he had taken worse hits than this and gotten up laughing. Once, with the idiotic Pete Moore piloting his flexible flyer and Henry riding behind him. They had gone head-on into the big pine at the foot of the hill, and one with all the kinds called the death tree, and survived with nothing more than few bruises and a couple of loose teeth each. The trouble was, he hadn't been 10 or 11 for a lot of years.